Coming up on this week's RegCast.
The banks themselves are coming to the realization from an efficiency and an accuracy perspective. We need something that spans all of it so that we can surveil all of it and report on all of it and have it continuous without any breaks. And that's where we are now getting to as an industry, is from an efficiency and an accuracy perspective, we need to be able to surveil the entire front to back.
Then you have something that you can use in multiple stages within the projects. You can use that representation of the rules in the developing phase, in the testing phase, but also in production. It gives you the full transparency of what you're being asked in terms of regulatory data. And also it's even useful not only for the banks, but for the trade repositories and also the regulators.
You know, having that plethora of different regulatory requirements, you then have to understand, well, you know, how do we find the synergies within this whole data minefield? And that's what us as an organization we're looking to do, is we're looking to take all of these complexities, take all of these different requirements and try and boil them down to the grassroots of data foundations.
From my front offices, from my heads of business, what they want to know is, what is the power of this tool? What can we do with it beyond reporting? Reporting, even though there have been fines and even though it's a huge cost sink for us, you know, it's what is the power beyond reporting? How can we integrate this into our settlement systems? How can we integrate this into our legal systems so that we have a link between what we confirm, what we settle, and what we report?
Finally, we looking post-pandemic, we're reloading, and there's so much opportunity here. It's unreal. So 10 years on from our initial discussions in this space, I think we're finally making some progress, and I'm looking forward to having everybody on the ride.
Welcome to
RegCast, where we shine a light on banking digitization.
Hi, and welcome from JWG, where we have this next RegCast on SupTech reporting. For 18 months, we've been analyzing the post-pandemic regulatory agenda and trying to make sense of the patchwork of new obligations. We're really excited about our conference coming up because it gives us an opportunity to pull together a few of the really big themes. And I'm excited to have some panelists here to help us do that. One of those themes is all about how we link data and the systemic view of technology together. And we're calling that digital integrity, which would come out from a couple of different angles. In this panel, we want to cover off really what does it mean from a reporting point of view. And regulatory reporting has been a thorn in the side of the whole industry for a while. Since the financial crisis, there's been a lot more of it. And post-pandemic, there's a lot more even on the agenda now. But the good news is RegTech and SupTech have provided new technology and new approaches to really invigorate the way we look at this space. But it can't come soon enough. Right? We're recording this the end of September. We just had $3 million in fines from the CFTC. That's just one regulator for 3 different firms. They weren't getting the reporting right. A couple of weeks before that, everybody in the UK got at the PRA regulated firms, Bank of England, got a Dear CEO letter that woke everybody up about their historic lack of focus, prioritization, investment in regulatory reporting. So there's a lot of big statements out there about how reg reporting needs to change, and that it needs to be as important as market reporting, which is a really big statement because you really need to think through every cell in your annual report and how we calculate that and how auditors look at it, and then leap across to the unstructured view of the information that has been asked for by many of the regulators in many different forms. And you realize that there's a whole need for an ecosystem here to support the way we think about those data needs and keep them up to date with what the regulators need. So this RegCast is all focused about what is changing and what you might want to come to our conference to hear. So I'm really pleased to introduce a few of the excellent speakers from our conference. Dowd, can we start with you? Just a quick introduction.
Hi, PJ. Dowd Hark from Deutsche Bank. My role is Market Initiatives, Regulatory Transformation and Strategy. It's global in nature. I've spoken before on one of these redcasts, so I won't go into a great deal of detail about my background. Just to say that I am working on many of the industry initiatives around the DRR, in particular with the Bank of England and also with ESMA, and also with our market infrastructure providers such as MarketWire and DTCC.
Thank you, Doug. Fraser.
Thanks, PJ. So Fraser Hall, the Global Head of Product Management for Financial Regulatory Solutions at Adenza, formerly AxiomSL. So my key focus is in looking at the future regulations and obviously how we can solutionize them, how as a technology and software firm we can deliver solutions to the industry to help them on the journey.
And last but not least, Mark.
Thanks, PJ. I'm Mark Ratakos, the managing partner of TradeHeather. TradeHeather is a consulting company focused on data standards such as FPML, ISDA CDM, FIX, and ISO 2022. We provide advisory services to firms in data integration project and data transformation.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. It's a fantastic group. Dowd, I wanted to start with you to kick us off. The people hear regulatory reporting and their eyes tend to glaze over, and it's a common effect that I've picked up across regulated and suppliers. Can you help us understand what data are we really talking about? What's it used for, and what are some of the big changes, and why is it important right now?
Yes, PJ. So there are a few things we need to consider here. Firstly, what is the underpinning data? So it depends on the regulatory regime we are considering. So if we're looking at systemic risk, we're looking at trade reporting, trade and transaction reporting. So this is basically the economic data that's used in executions with clients. Now, this has to be reported on a regular basis to different NCAs, national competent authorities across the globe. So sometimes it's the same data and sometimes it's slightly different. And it's in those differences is where the friction lies between the reporting regimes. But if we actually take a step back from that and we just look beyond the systemic risk reporting, which came after the 2008 credit crisis, and we think about the other regimes which are out there as well, particularly around the prudential side. So we look at the Basel reporting that we have to do, and the CRR. This is all about credit risk. It's also all about liquidity in the banks and how much of that and how much we have on a day-to-day basis and based on and how much capital we have to support our trading activity. So if we think about that data, actually underpinning that data is also the same data we use in our systemic risk reporting, which is our trade data. There is a few add-on pieces as well, but essentially it's the same. So what we're doing at the moment with our prudential regulators, which are people like the central banks, is looking at how we can cross-pollinate the data. So reuse of the data we use in our systemic risk into the data we use for our prudential reporting as well. So we don't have to recreate the wheel each time. It also creates an extra data quality check. But reporting is only one part of the solution here. So I want to step away purely from reporting. I know this webcast is about reporting, but actually if we look at what the common domain model is that underpins the DRR, we actually can see that the common domain model, the power of it is it models transactions that we execute in the market, puts a legal layer on top of that. So what we can actually do is look at the full life cycle of a trade from execution through to settlement. And what we want to do is extend the use of the common domain model and start looking at it from a settlement perspective as well. And that means that we can bring in things like CSDR, which is so we're extending it way beyond transparency just for reporting.
So you basically, I see why you went there. I mean, the ask is so big for this systemic information, right? It's really All the reporting we've had in since the 70s and Basel I has been all about aggregating balance sheets and looking sort of top down, how safe is the system, but has never really got to the transactional level in any kind of detailed way. And then since MiFID 16 years ago, we all then started putting out lots more transactional reporting. And post-crisis, we started putting everything out there for everybody. And we really now have a bottom-up view of lots of trades and transaction reports that need to marry with the top-down, right?
That's absolutely right. There's also, so what we've been doing up to date is very much an execution-focused reporting regimes, whereas what we're moving to now is a settlement-based reporting via CSDR. And actually, they realize that even post maturity date of a trade, you still have liabilities on that trade until you settled. And so if we look at things like SFTR, for example, we don't want to close a trade until the final settlement has taken place, which is 2 days after, or even 3 days after the maturity date. So actually we're starting to, as you say, look right from the beginning all the way through to the end of the life cycle of a trade. And the regulators want visibility over that entire span. And so we need to think about a brand new way of doing that reporting.
Yeah, brand new because that end to end is so long and so complicated. There's many different languages used to describe what's happening along the life cycle, right?
And people. So a lot of them
different people and different firms, yeah.
And how do we transfer that information back up the stack to a central point where it can be reported out to the regulators? Yeah, that's the challenge.
It is, and it's something the regulators really can't mandate for us, unfortunately. So it gets into a lot of technical expertise about how the industry operates. So really, what we've seen in our working groups is you need the people at the coalface able to answer that very specific question about notional calculations for an asset class. You can't just mandate that from on high. You've got to get that particular community involved. I think that's the really interesting bit, is that this becomes a very collaborative discussion, and regulators are good at saying it's collaborative, but the industry needs to kind of figure out how to operationalize that, because these aren't conversations that happen very naturally.
I think that's right. I think just to expand on this point. So the way the regulators have worked up to today is that they're regulating in silos. So you'll get something like systemic risk reporting for trade reporting, and that'll be trade reporting via EMIR. You'll get surveillance reporting, and that's MiFID 2. Okay, so that's front office and that's execution. You'll also get CSDR, which is settlements based. Okay, but there's nothing joining those up in terms of regulation that overarches the entire piece. But the banks themselves are coming to the realization, from an efficiency and an accuracy perspective, we need something that spans all of it, so that we can surveil all of it and report on all of it and have it continuous without any breaks. And that's where we are now getting to as an industry, is from an efficiency and an accuracy perspective, we need to be able to surveil the entire front to back and be able to link them together. And then that final piece then provides the prudential regulators with the data they need for CRR, for example, and the FRTB is another perfect example of what that front to back model actually then provides.
Yeah, fascinating. That risk picture should just drop out of the transactional data, but of course we then have to get everything mapped back to the more operational view of life. So I'd like to go to Fraser for a second here, because Fraser, you mentioned in the intro that your new company has really taken an approach which embraces the very change we're talking about. So you've taken a couple different types of business problems and brought them together under a new roof. Why don't you tell us a bit why you did that?
Yeah, so it's been a very interesting journey. So it's as AxiomSL, we were very much focused on the regulatory reporting. Now, regulatory reporting was historically just seen as the last part of the data journey, where you're aggregating the information, you're obviously publishing that to the regulators. But there's the whole journey that the information has to come from, the trades, the transactions, the products themselves. and actually going all the way through that journey up into the data points on the regulatory report. So what we've done is, under Adenza, is we've joined Calypso Technologies and AxiomSL together, where Calypso are very much at that kind of front and middle office kind of sphere, whereas Axiom's always been at the back office in terms of the regulatory reporting. And we've actually seen the synergies on that entire data journey and the value that you can have by having front, middle, and back office all integrated into one consistent data pattern and accurate reporting. I guess it's really, as we look at it, regulatory reporting is no longer at the aggregated level. It's no longer about just publishing numbers. And historically, that was done on Excel spreadsheets, and there was a lot of calculations done on the fly. There's now more of a requirement to prove out the journey of that information as it flows through the institutions, and having to make evidence and basically prove out where that information is and the accuracy of that information. That means that you do actually have to understand the entire life cycle of where your information is coming from. And I think, as you discussed before, there's obviously the trade and transaction regulations and guidance, so that MiFID II, EMIR, etc. That's all trade and transaction reporting at the trade and the transaction level. But then we also cover the reporting under FRTB, under CRR2, and in the future it will be CRR3. And we also do the statistical reporting to the central banks, which is Bank of England required the trial balance reporting. So having that plethora of different regulatory requirements, you then have to understand, well, how do we find the synergies within this whole data minefield? And that's what us as an organization we're looking to do, is we're looking to take all of these complexities, take all of these different requirements and try and boil them down to the grassroots of data foundations, and taking that data foundation and providing solutions which allow the automation of that reporting, and the calculations associated with it.
Yeah, and that's such a massive new user base for you. Again, and you talk, it's simply about front office and back office, but you think about, not only the trading desks, but all of the support functions like the non-financial risk controls and the data groups and and the risk management functions and finance and even legal. Everyone was going to feed off of this integrated foundation that you talk about. What's it mean for these users as you're seeing them now, and how are they reacting to the idea of coming together on a common platform?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of seen it historically where we were dealing with the reg reporting kind of field, because you had the treasury departments, you had the regulatory reporting teams, you had the financial teams, the accounting departments. Everyone had to kind of come together, and ultimately there was an ownership required of the data or the information that was being published to the regulators, or even on the disclosures to the wider public. With this kind of merger, as you say, there's all of these different teams interacting along the process and along the pipeline, that's the life cycle. What we find is that the more that you can bring those teams together, and the more that they can use one platform, or maybe even just a couple of solutions on that information journey, it actually stops fragmenting these teams and how they work together, and the ability for them to actually interact with the information as it's flowing through the different systems and be able to take ownership of that information as it's going through. It just means that the accuracy of the detail at the the most rightmost side, which is obviously the disclosures or the regulatory obligations, you can actually have more trust and more confidence in what you're producing. And I think that's one of the key benefits that you get. You get ownership at the full life cycle, and you're consolidating that into perhaps one user interface and one system, which allows you to really ensure that there's no unknowns happening as the information's traversing through an organization.
Yeah, exactly. And it's spotting those outliers and understanding deviations from the mean and all that kind of good stuff. What you can do at a macro level, which is hard to do in a silo. I think that's sort of what the fines in the Bank of England PRA discussion are all about. Really, like, we've got to get better at this and treat it more seriously. It's fascinating stuff. Mark, I'd like to come to you because you've been involved in a lot of reporting projects, and I'm really reporting gets right at the guts of everything everybody does and makes them define it. And we now have a much broader view of what everybody does, and we have a much bigger ask for what regulators are looking for. How will a bank's plumbing change as a result of and how will these projects work?
Yeah, I think that's the key question in terms of what will happen internally within the banks in terms of reg reporting. What we have seen in many implementations in the initial waves of reg reporting was that what we call the trial and error approach, which is okay, the TRs were giving a set of specifications that you had to follow, and then the project team was trying to produce the data that was asked by the TR, and just basically based on testing, see what was missing from the data that they had aggregated. And that was very time consuming and very frustrating because for each particular TR, you basically had a specific specification based on the regulator that was different from each regulator, each TR. So it was extremely frustrating from a user perspective. I think with the DRR and the implementation using CDM, things will change. I think having the ability to have regulations in a standard representation using the common domain model, the CDM, with common interpretations of the rules being discussed by different members of the banks in a collaborative way, it brings huge added value to the institutions, because then you have something that you can use in multiple stages within the projects. You can use that representation of the rules in the developing phase, in the testing phase, but also in production. It gives you the full transparency of what you're being asked in terms of regulatory data. And also it's even useful not only for the banks, but for the trade repositories and also the regulators. So I don't think we will see a huge change in terms of infrastructure within the banks, but I think you will face the integration of the DRR CDM components within the existing infrastructure to improve the transparency of the regulatory reporting.
Understood. So effectively, it'll make each of the implementation projects easier at each bank because
exactly. I think it will become kind of like a service that you will have within the bank, but a service that is provided by the collaboration of the different institutions that are involved in the development of the DRR CDM definition and specification. If you look at like 20 years ago, when data standards like FIX or FPML were developed, which were focused on the data representation of the products, we saw huge value of using those specifications to have a common understanding of those products. I think we are seeing the same here, but instead of focusing on the products, it's basically focusing on the regulatory aspect of those products, and being able to basically have the whole life cycle that you need to report to the regulator in a standard way.
Yeah. No, and it's actually really interesting. You start talking to people about the value the trade associations are playing right now, pushing the language into a more formalized structure with the new definitions and glossaries and all. But that only matters from a regulatory point of view if you can tie it to a common domain model. So you can then link the business language back to the regulatory language, which is then where you can say, okay, yes, this is accurate, and that is a valid representation of that fact.
Exactly. The advantage that we have now, I think, is that we have technology that can help us with that. So it can help us in terms of defining the glossary and having that tied to the specific implementation that you want to have in terms of the use of that concept into the regulation, and being able then to link that to the data that you need to produce for that particular field. So I think technology helps us in terms of improving the functions that we can use for producing like standard regulatory reporting.
It's fantastic. So Dowd, hearing from Fraser and Mark and thinking about the conference, what what are some of the key things you think the audience will be taking away? I mean, why should they dial in and listen to the discussion about the next generation of regulatory reporting?
There's a few different important things I think that certainly I will be interested in hearing from other participants, and in the networking after the events themselves will be around what are firms going to do in the near term? What are their goals? I know a few firms are looking to do implementations of DRR internally. I also know that certain firms are going to be taking the outputs from it and using them as a benchmark, but I don't know how many, and I don't know which jurisdictions they're going to pick. I want to, one of the powers of this tool is that not only the crowdsourcing of the information itself, but it's the outputs and how many people sign up to that, right? So if we are the majority, then it becomes the gold standard that everybody needs to attain. One of the things I'm very much interested in is understanding that landscape and who is implementing, who isn't, and how much of it's going to be bespoke versus how much are going to take out the box. So that's the first area that I'm interested in. Secondly is what they're looking to do beyond reporting. Now I know that we seem to be on the first step of the journey with, and it's taken us a long time, PJ, to get here, isn't it? To get the reporting element to this stage. And it feels like we still haven't grown it enough yet. But from my front offices, from my heads of business, what they want to know is, what is the power of this tool? What can we do with it beyond reporting? Reporting, even though there have been fines and even though it's a huge cost sink for us, it's what is the power beyond reporting? How can we bring this, integrate this into our settlement systems? How can we integrate this into our legal systems so that we have a link between what we confirm, what we settle, and what we report? What additional values can we get? Also looking at obviously what we can do from the prudential side and how we're going to integrate this with our wholesale reporting for things like the Bank of England, for example. So that's really what I want to get out of this conference.
Yeah, those are great points, and you're right about the timing. But I think it's taken 2022, 2023 to get the implementation cycle right. I guess, Fraser, what are you looking forward mostly to talking about at the conference?
Yeah, I think echo the sentiments there. We're going to have a lot of interesting participants, interesting discussions, and interesting people from different aspects of the problem and the challenge, and obviously perspectives on what this kind of means in the future. I think the interesting bit is finding out what does that mean from all the different sides. What is the approach that everyone's taking? What can we potentially present, or what can we do now to prepare ourselves better for the future? And I think one of the very interesting things is this is obviously an initiative which is starting to gain a lot more traction. There's a lot more interest around the world on this DRR initiative, and it's not just centralized within Europe, where maybe most of the participants and most of the institutions will be aware. But there's also the impact that's having out in the Middle East, where they're very much looking to the next generation of regulatory reporting, where they're actually looking to skip a few steps and actually maybe move towards more of these initiatives. So I think it's something which is going to impact us globally. And I think the interesting bit is to see, well, how does what's happening just now potentially roll on to the next phase? And that's what I'm kind of interested in hearing, different perspectives and the challenges that people see on the journey to get to that point.
That great point about helping to set the frame of reference for jurisdictions that don't have all the legacy that could potentially leapfrog this, because I think that's a critical point. Mark, what about you? What are you most looking forward to talking about at the conference?
I think I'm interested as well in terms of the view of the regulators, in terms of the plans they have of using DRR and technology in general, because I think there is probably a lot of improvements that can be done just using like better technology, and their plans in terms of DRR. That will be super interesting. And also, one of the areas I'm in particular interested, and I think there is a panel on that, is regarding the risk data and risk reporting, because I think there is a huge interaction between risk reporting and regulatory data. But risk is an area that hasn't been much focused on regarding data modeling and data representation. And I think it becomes more and more important, especially when the regulators are asking not only about transactional data, but also risk data. And they're interested as well in terms of what other firms are using and are doing regarding different sources of that risk data and how to aggregate that.
If I can come back in there just briefly, PJ. So firstly, from Fraser's point, brilliant one about cross-jurisdictional, right? And in particular, the opportunity that newer regimes will have to just pick up where we've got to over the last 15 years of development and don't have to go through those early stages of pain. Learn the lessons from what we've done wrong previously and start at a much better point. And that's key, and that's something that I talk to regulators about often, is learn the mistakes of other jurisdictions rather than having to go through the same pain again. So that's a great point. And secondly, on Mark's one about the risk, you're absolutely right, it is the foundation, it is exactly the same, but they haven't got the history of the data standardization that we have from a transaction and trade reporting, because it was always just the output that was sent to the central banks. They never saw the data that underpinned that. And so they only got the final output. Now the question is do the central banks take the raw data itself, which is a big challenge to the banks because the amount of data that we use in those models to create that is huge? Or do we create some other approach in order to provide that transparency? And that indeed does or could come from that trade and transaction data. So they're both fantastic points that I wanted to call out. They're great.
Yeah, guys, I don't think we can say it much better than that. So I'm going to skip any kind of wrap-up question. And I thank you for whetting our appetite. We have a fantastic set of regulators and great academics, as well as other practitioners and trade associations and think tanks. So we're really looking to bring massive firepower to these problems on the 16th and 17th. And I really encourage everybody listening to this to jump onto the website, regtechconference.co.uk, check it out, let us know what you're interested in and how we can make this the best conversation it can be. You know, we're here because we want to make the process of implementation of regs better, faster, cheaper, and safer. And I think finally, looking post-pandemic, we're reloading, and there's so much opportunity here. It's unreal. So 10 years on from our initial discussions in this space, I think we're finally making some progress, and I'm looking forward to having everybody on the ride. So thank you all very much for participating, and we'll see you soon.
You can go to our conference website, which is regtechconference.co.uk, or go to the JWG website, which is jwg-it.eu. This is RegCast,
where we shine a light on banking digitization.